Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Diaspora Chronicles. My name is Muloongo Muchelemba, and I am the founder of Ongolo.com, a Pan-African website whose main objective is to keep Africans connected and engaged and to promote Africa and Africans. Today, we'll be talking about African parents raising third culture kids. And this is a topic that's close to my heart because I am also a third culture kid, though an adult third culture kid today. Before the age of 18, I had lived in 5 countries outside my home country, Zambia. So I'm really looking forward to tonight's discussion where we'll explore some of the challenges that African parents face today in raising third culture kids. And I'm delighted to welcome to the program Molly, who's written a book called So Grandma Says, and we'll explore that in detail. But first, we'll talk about third culture kids. So Molly, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Muloongo.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to exploring this, talking about your book for starters, but also just exploring this topic of, parents raising international children today, of which you are. But before we get into that topic, I thought it would be great for people to know who you are.
So my name is Dr Mollynn Mugisha-Otim. Otim is the name that I took up when I got married. And I am a medical doctor by training. I spent the first years of my life, until I was 30 actually, I trained as a medical doctor in Uganda. And then I moved to the Netherlands to join my partner. And I had practice in Uganda as a medical doctor. And when I came to the Netherlands, I kind of took time to find my way. And I went into childhood education, early childhood education, which was a natural step because I was starting a family and I was really intrigued by everything about it. So I then advanced into becoming an early childhood educator. And then I am also a mother of 2. So along the way, 2 children, one is 10 and the second one is 7, who have both been born and are growing up in the Netherlands. And along the way, again, I gained interest in writing materials for kids. So I'm also an author. I started writing books for children who are growing up outside their own culture, growing up abroad, with the purpose of connecting them to the African culture. So I am a wife, a mother, a doctor, an early childhood educator, but also an author.
Yeah, and you've written 2 books thus far, and this was your first book?
Yes, that was my first book, which was really for me to learn my husband's language, and then for them to learn the language because they don't speak the language. So I thought the best way is write a book that introduces them to the basics. So that was my first book.
Okay, and then your recent book publication is So Said Grandma.
This is my most recent one, which is only a couple of months after publication. And this is really a collection of sayings and African wisdoms from the African culture, of course, which I grew up in, which I was very familiar with because I was raised in a part by my grandmother. So that's very dear to me. It's a tribute to my grandmother.
Oh, amazing. And we'll come back to the book in a bit. But I thought we should start by just getting people acquainted with the concept of third culture kids. So could you just help some of the viewers who might be watching this program and are hearing this terminology for the first time?
So third culture kids is really a term that has been developed in the last few decades. And it describes a person who has lived for a significant part of their formative years, so when they're really young, outside the culture of their parents. So it could be that they have lived abroad. It could also be that they are still within their country, but they are living in a different culture, different from their parents' culture. And so they are called third culture kids because this is the way, the kind of culture that they form and the way they see things is neither the same exactly as their parents, but it's also not the same as their host culture. So it's kind of in between. It's like a third culture. And it could be, it doesn't have to be just 2 cultures. It could be 3 more or more. So some of them, if one parent is, for example, French and the other one is African, and they are growing up in the Netherlands. So that's already several cultures that are going to influence their formative part of development. And so they will be quite different from an ordinary child growing up in one culture. So that's the third culture kid.
Great. And so that's basically summarizes my own experience, because my dad was in foreign service. So we traveled quite a bit growing up. And so naturally, foreign service kids, military kids, missionary kids, were the original third culture kids, and a lot of businesses as well. So like your husband works for Shell. So people have grown up being very international, living from country to country, and being exposed to different things. So you kind of go through these dynamics of not really knowing what home is. Home is not so much a place, but probably like a feeling you get in your heart, or the people that you're surrounded with. So, I mean, it would be great to find out. I mean, you're raising 2 children. Like, what are some of the challenges that you face raising your own TCKs?
Well, the challenges are really based on what the understanding of what is a culture being the way people do things. And so if you are in one culture, everything is very clear. How you eat, what you eat, how you talk and communicate is very clear. But when you're in between 2 different cultures, the challenges are much more diverse. So for example, of course, when you are away from home, there is that your children have a missed connection. They miss the connection to home. You want them to know about your culture. You want to know about how you do things. They eat the same food, but they don't have that. They are growing away from home. And there is also the question of where is home for the child. Where is home? Even for you, once you move out of your place, where is home? I live in the Netherlands. I've lived here for 13 years. My children have been born here. So where is home? I keep telling them we're Ugandan, we're from Uganda, but actually they have a Dutch passport. So is home Uganda or is home the Netherlands? So it becomes a very big question of where is home? And then the question of who am I? Well, my kids, because I have raised them with an awareness of that they are third culture kids, I tell them home is where you are. We are now in the Netherlands, it's home. And maybe in future you will move to Uganda. It is also home because a large chunk of your family is there. But you could also then move to Korea, and that would be home. So home is where you are. Home is where the heart is. Home is where you're settled. Because the challenge is when home is where you're not, there is one leg in Holland, one leg in Uganda, and then you never really settle. You think, shall I buy a house? Or shall I, but I'm soon going home, and then you never go home. So for the kids, I raise them knowing home is where you are.
Oh, that's
and
really
that for my kids is very clear. And if you ask them, if you ask my daughter, you say, oh, who are you? She says, well, I am Dutch. I've been born and raised in Dutch, but I'm also Ugandan because my parents are from Uganda and I go to Uganda often. And they even split it to say, I speak my mother's language and I speak my father's language. So they have a real good understanding of who they are. And the other challenge, of course, when you're raising the child in a foreign place, the standards are different. I remember when my son was little, you have to take them for health checks for to monitor the growing. And I always got, oh, you know, he's very small. And then, of course, the chart that they are measuring him on is the Dutch chart. The Dutch are very tall, they are very big. And again, because I had that awareness, I was never worried. I didn't think he's underweight. I didn't think he was not growing well, because I said, look at me, I'm 150 centimeters. And I don't expect that my kids will be so tall. So that kind of standard and understanding, for example, the kind of advice you get from the health facilities or from the growth monitoring. At 6 months, my child has to eat bread, but then we don't consider bread as food. So I'm already giving my child a local food. I say, but is he eating bread? I said, no, he's not eating bread. Oh, you need to give him bread. I said, but I don't eat bread. So it's some of those challenges are really like in daily life. And the kids start
I lost you.
They interact with kids from all other classes. So people generally don't eat home lunch.
I lost you in that point.
And so he
do you want to just rewind? We're having challenges. So just a second, because I know somebody's asked this question that it keeps cutting. There seems to be something wrong. So Andrew, it's probably not on your end. It's probably on my end. There seems to be something wrong with the Wi-Fi keeps dropping. So just bear with us, please, and we'll try to. You're much clearer now. So you were cutting a little bit. Do you want to just repeat that point about, you talked about the child eating bread as a baby. What was that afterwards?
Yeah, because the advice I was getting from the growth monitoring place here that we call the Consultancy Bureau was that at 6 months, I should start to introduce him to bread, which is really meaning I need to start introducing him to solid food. But I don't eat bread. We don't consider bread food. So I was telling them, I'm giving him something else. Yeah, but he needs to eat bread. I say, yeah, I understand. So I didn't make a deal of it because I understand it from my side. But when we started, he started school, what do the kids take for lunch? It's all at different levels that you have to really understand that there is no right or wrong, because they will say this is the right thing to do. But in my culture, it's probably we do it something in another way. So those were some of the challenges. Plus, of course, understanding the educational system. The educational system in different countries can be different. So how to educate my child, what expectations to set for my child can be different. So it cuts across many levels. And what I would say is for anyone raising a child, raising a TCK, you really have to have an open mind, because my son will talk back to me when he thinks that I have that I've not treated him fairly, and he will talk back and argue his point. And I would tell him, I could never talk like that to my mom. So it's this is disrespect. And he's like, what do you mean it's disrespect? So am I supposed to just be quiet when you're telling when it's not true? So those levels of differences, because I was raised that you listen and you don't talk back, and but kids talk back because the culture in which they are, they talk back. And if you raise them not to talk back, then they're not really going to compete at the same level with other kids. So it's looking at how did I do it? And then I can't expect that my child will do it the same way because he's in a completely different environment.
Well, that's a really good point.
Open-minded.
So you also told me the story about your daughter and the struggle she's having with her hair. Do you want to just narrate that story? Because I thought it was a brilliant one.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, of course, when I was growing up, the standard was the same. We all cut our hair short because we were in school. And with my daughter growing up, she has friends of all sorts, and mainly from white backgrounds. So they have long hair, they have straight hair. Plus, of course, Disney is all over the place. So she always thought she wasn't really beautiful because her hair is not that nice, and the color of skin is not that nice, and she wants to be like this friend, I want to be like that friend. So I thought this is really something that it can result in a future identity crisis. Have to do something about it now. And so that's actually what motivated me to start creating materials that expose her in some way to all kinds of like beauty is not just long blonde hair, and it's not just blue eyes and white skin, and so I really, that was really for me very deep to say I need to expose her to a lot more and to really keep talking positively. So I actually stopped straightening my hair. I stopped putting any chemicals. I hardly do any braids, and I want her to see that I can actually be pretty. But I wanted to say something about the immense advantages of third culture kids, because the challenges are known and very clear, but the advantages are probably what people don't think about very much. So first of all, third culture kids are very open-minded, because again, the standard is, it can be depending on where you stand. So they are very open-minded, they are very easygoing, but they are also very welcoming to change, because change is something they have grown up with. A lot changes in their life, their friends go. I'm sure, Muloongo, by the time you finish primary school, you have seen friends come and go. Yeah. You don't have permanent friends. So that becomes something that they take along with them, that they're very open-minded, they're very friendly, they understand how to solve conflicts. And of course, for them, they have almost no fear. And they like to travel, they like to explore the world, they have a different view of the world. And so they can easily resolve conflicts because they understand that they can be like bridge builders, where you have two people disagreeing on something. They'll say, okay, she's right, but she's also right when you look at it like that. So you're both right, which is very rare when somebody hasn't had that kind of experience. They are very adaptable, and they have easily a lot of confidence. If it's been right, if they have been raised to know their identity, then they really have confidence to try new things, and they can appreciate cultural diversity. They'll want, for example, to go to Mexico and find out how is the food in Mexico, because they really want to know how is the world over there. So they can navigate a lot of cultural differences and cultural worlds. So they are really a big resource for the world.
Oh, that's really great to hear, because I can totally relate to a lot of that in terms of being adaptable. I remember, I think I told you this when I was working in Joburg and we had to move to a Dubai office, and my boss called me in the office and said, would you be willing to work in Dubai? And I was like, okay. And he was like,
Yeah.
do you have time to think about it? I'm like, no, I've never lived in the Middle East. This might be the only opportunity to live in the Middle East. So I'm game. And I moved. And when I decided to move back to Zambia, I literally packed my bags in 3 weeks. But the only problem, though, I mean, having said, there's a lot of positives, but there's also, like you say, there's a lot of downsides, and that we tend to be very restless. So in the last 8 years, I've moved 4 times, and I've been in Singapore for 2.5 years, and I'm like, it's been a long time. It's time to move to my next country. So I do feel very unsettled. Having said, I lived in the UK for a really long time. Next to Zambia, the UK is my second home because I sort of feel settled. And I'm craving that sort of stability now to go somewhere and stay for another 10 years. But I just haven't found that place. So we tend to be very restless. So
it's if you get kids, for example, when you get kids, I always tell people, until your kids are 10, 11, you can move as many times as you want. But once they get to that age, they really crave for you to settle down. So it kind of forces you to settle down. Every time we think of moving, we're thinking, oh, but the kids are settled, they're in school, and he's soon going to secondary school. So it kind of, settles you down somehow.
Well, that's great. I just wanted to flash some of the comments here because we've got someone called Christy who said she agreed with you when you're talking about your son and eating bread and also the standard, the height standard. So she totally agreed with you. And she also agreed with your point about being open-minded. The TCKs tend to be open-minded. And also said, great point. So Christy, thank you so much for your feedback. And someone
Christy and my son go to the same class.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's great. Oh, thank you for the comments. So someone asked us what we're talking about. Please refer to the poster on the website. So today's conversation is around African parents raising third culture kids, but we'll also talk about Molly's new book, which actually we can go into now, because it'd be great to understand how we're linking this to, you wrote So Said Grandma, but you're linking it to cultural identity and making sure that we don't forget who we are. So can we just talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so these books have been the motivation for me, is to write books that really bring the culture of Africa to the kids who are growing up outside Africa. And culture is about food, it's about language, it's about way of doing things, it's about clothing, it's about a mode of education. So when we were growing up, behavior and manners was just taught as part of daily life and through stories. And I remember the stories my grandma used to tell us, sitting around the fire after dinner. And we learned a lot. It wasn't written down. There were no books, there were no textbooks, there were no illustrations. It was just more our imagination. And I find, as I was raising my kids, that every time I want to explain something, I know my grandma would have just said one word and I would know exactly what she means. And I find we use a lot of words to try and explain, to try and bring across some values. So I thought it would really be nice if we can begin to develop materials. And So Said Grandma was like one of those books that I want my kids to know how my grandma used to talk to me. And not just my grandma, my mom, and everybody who was raising kids. And, sitting by the fireplace, listening to those stories. And I also didn't want it to be something that is removed and out there, something they can't relate to. So I use a lot of examples in daily life, like today, what they can really see. I don't want them to think, oh, that is just for Africa, so it doesn't really apply to us. So the examples are really in a contemporary way, but bringing back the kind of informal education that we had. And I thought it would be such a shame for most of these conversations to die out, because even in Africa, because they are not written down, they are not in any book, they are not in any kind of literature. People don't speak like that anymore, almost. They don't speak in proverbs, they don't speak in wise sayings. So I thought I should write them down in a very easy to read way that a child can read and understand. So that was the motivation for my book. And there's so many sayings. I only chose 41 because those that are specific for kids, but there are those for adults. Everything in Africa, you could say it in a saying, in a wise saying.
That's true. And I relate to the concept of grandma telling us stories, because we've grown up in a very oral storytelling is a core part of African culture. And I think the danger of modern day parents, and this is not just international African parents, but even African parents in urban areas, that we're not passing on that tradition of telling stories. You know, we're reading bedtime stories to our children that Western kids are reading. So they'll grow up knowing about trolls and, you know, Dora the Explorer and God knows what other cartoons they are, but they won't understand, you know, African concepts, and we won't be able to pass on our tradition. And the danger is that we will lose our identity unless we've learned to actually document it and pass on the stories. So I really admire what you're doing. And I thought that it would be great for us to talk about some examples. So we're talking about the elephants first?
Yeah, let's talk about that one. I mean, I see that every day. I see that at work. That saying says in my language that which really means that when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And I also took the opportunity, since I'm in Holland, to have it translated to Dutch. So this saying, it was used very commonly when I was growing up, and until today, it's still very applicable. And it's not really talking about elephants fighting, of course, but you can imagine when two elephants are fighting, it's not like the grass can run away. It's stuck there in a situation, and it will be trampled on and suffer the consequences of the mighty elephants fighting. But it applies in life, like when two people have a disagreement. Normally, there are a lot of innocent people who are not part of the argument, but they are stuck into it, that will suffer. And so I want the kids to understand this example very well, because even at work, I mean, when two departments don't agree, it's the people down below that are going to suffer. Or when two countries don't agree and they go into a war, normally the people who are fighting the war are not going to suffer as much as the innocent women and children who might have to leave their home, who might have to be displaced, or you know, in every war there is suffering of the civilians. So it really can be understood at many levels. And for kids, of course, I give them an example of, if they don't agree amongst each other, some people who are not part of their argument might be affected. So they have to think about the fact that your actions don't only affect you, but they affect everyone else who might be innocent in that situation.
Oh, I really like that. And exactly what you say. I mean, this proverb could be used to explain to children what's happening in the world with the US-China war, a trade war that's going on today.
Yeah.
It's not the United States and China that are really suffering. It's all the countries around the world that are now having to pay the same prices or having disruption to the supply chain. And I don't think people understand that. So this is a really clever way of educating children. Can I just ask, so why children and not adults? Because when I read your book, and by the way, her book is available on Kindle. So this is the proverb she was just talking about. Oh, sorry. That's the proverb she's just talking about. And so I have it on Kindle, which is great because you don't have to worry about deliveries these days. And when I read this, a lot of this applies to adults.
Yeah, the thing is with adults, first of all, I'm an early years educator. Second of all, I want my work to make an impact on the future. And you can make an impact on the future when you impact the children who are going to be the future. And then I think some of these concepts are very easy to learn when you're still young. I believe the formative years is the best time to teach a child values, because when you teach them the values when they're little, they will not depart from those values. They'll use those values as part of their life. I mean, with adults, you'll get into all sorts of arguments that is not most of the time pointless. So I really have a soft spot for children and for women. So most of the stuff I do is for children and for women, because I believe if you change the way a child thinks, you can impact them for the rest of their lives. So I really love to write for children.
Okay, that's great. And actually, so at this point, let me ask you the question that Andrew has posed here about, have you managed to teach your children your language, and how easy is it to do that when you're away from home?
So my first book, which was introduced, was one of the books that is used to teach the children my language, or my husband's language in that case. So my kids understand the difference between the two languages, my language and my husband's language, which are both Ugandan languages, but very different. So I teach them among other languages that they have to learn. So for example, they have to learn Dutch, and we speak English because we don't have the same language. So I noticed it's very difficult when you're in the diaspora to teach kids your language. You have to really be determined from the start. So because parents are very busy, they're running around, and parents also have a belief that you have to teach the host language and abandon your own language. So I want to change that. And it's because I know it's not easy. That's why I write children's books, because kids love to read. So even when you're not up to it, they will force you. They're like, oh, let's play the game. We have on Monday, every Monday is game night. And some of the days they're like, oh, let's play game night in Acholi, because they want to keep, so we play snakes and ladders in my language.
Wow.
So it becomes fun, and then they can also use the words, and they remind you, if you forget to speak English, like, we're playing it in Acholi. So if they don't understand the word, they ask. So it's very difficult because the schedules are busy, because they are also having to learn the local language, but we really have to make the effort. So I am really making an effort to make sure that if they go to Uganda, they're not completely lost.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not fluent in it. They don't have to be fluent in it, but at least they should be able to understand and make a basic interaction.
Oh, that's really important, actually, because when we were really little, we knew how to speak. So my mom is Bemba from the northern part of Zambia, and my dad is Tonga from the southern part of Zambia. And we knew how to speak those languages because of our grandmas. But because we left the country when I was 2 and moved to Belgium, and then we lived in the UK, by the time we got back from the UK, we couldn't speak local languages. I mean, my Bemba is really sketchy right now, and I can barely speak any Tonga. And so it's true that you have to keep that sense of connection back home. But how do you make sure that they're practicing it? Other than, is it just with yourselves on game night, or do they get a chance to speak to family back home? How do you keep that dialogue going?
That's a really proper, genuine challenge, because even back home, fewer and fewer people are speaking the local language. So all my sisters, for example, are growing up in the city. They're raising kids in the city. Their own kids don't speak it. So that is really difficult, because what I do, there are a lot of, on YouTube, there are a lot of like comedy shows and stuff that is in the local language. I try to make sure they see that a lot. And indeed, that is a challenge, because even grandparents, they have the feeling that the kids should speak English, so they speak to them in English. So we really have to stimulate that, because that is very complicated, how to make sure that they keep connected to the language. So that is why we need to develop more materials that are child-friendly, where kids can actually tune in and watch. So like you have CBBS that teaches English. We should have more programs and more books that teach the local language.
Oh, I agree.
Because even people who are back in Africa are not speaking the local language.
And thanks for mentioning that, because we talked about third culture kids in the context as if it was international, but this is an Africa problem in Africa with urbanization. So I think people watching the show need to appreciate that in the context that you've shed light on. So just a couple of questions. So Taz is a friend of mine here in Singapore. Hey, Taz. She's agreeing with you that you instill culture and identity at a young age, and her kids are TCKs and they're cross-culture kids from Africa and Australia. So that's an interesting dynamic. But she does ask, I mean, I think Taz missed the intro. She asked, how old are your children?
Well, my son is 10 and my daughter is 7.
Okay, follow-up question to that is, did you start from the get-go, or when did you start actually teaching them in your local language?
So I started later. And that also is a cultural thing, because in Africa, the children are normally supposed to speak the language of the father.
Oh.
And my language and my husband's language are different. So I had a really good plan, because if we go to Africa and my kids are speaking my language, the question is, whose kids are these?
Really? Oh gosh, okay. I didn't know that. I speak more of my mom's language than my dad's.
Because you were more often with your mom, and your mom was smart. But anyway, so I wasn't that smart. I thought it's better they first learn properly the father's language, and then I teach them a bit of mine. And then I realized, of course, my husband is a very busy man, and he hardly speaks it. Once in a while, he speaks a random sentence. So I thought, they're never going to learn it, because I also wanted to learn his language, you see, to be part of the family. So I thought, this is not happening. And that's why the book I wrote of learning actually is in his language, because it's not my language. But I'm thinking, I want to learn it and I want them to learn it. So I'm going to then create, and if he can't speak it with them, he has to read them the book. So that I started late, and that's a regret of mine, but it's not too late, because kids are very adaptable. TCKs learn languages very quickly. So if I had started earlier, and that's for those whose kids are still young, start from the word go. So if you start from the word go, because the worry is that the kids are going to school. So if you teach them your language, they won't learn the school language if it's English or Dutch or whatever. But that's not entirely true. In my experience in working in an international setting with early childhood, kids can speak up to 4 languages.
Wow.
In one go. They can comfortably, as long as you keep speaking it to them. I have a big number of our clients where I work. They speak, for example, dad could be Swedish and mom is German, and they're coming to school where they're learning in English, and they play in the community where kids speak Dutch. So mom will speak Swedish to them, dad will speak German to them, and only German. And they will be having English in school, and they will also learn Dutch, 4 languages before the age of 4. And they'll speak it quite well, and there is no confusion. The only thing we have to be aware of is that if they are going to be measured in the early years against children who are speaking one language, they might speak later, couple of months later. So if the same child compared with the one in one language is speaking, can make 20 words, has a vocabulary of 20 words, yours might have a vocabulary of 5 words. But that's not a problem, because they're measuring the English. But yours has also a vocabulary of 5 words in German and 5 words in Swedish and 5 words in Dutch. So they have a bigger vocabulary, and they're still sorting out how the languages, the rules between them making the sentences. So they might speak later, but by the age of 4, there is no difference, only that they have 4 languages and this child has 1.
Wow.
So start from the word go, if you can.
Okay, so it's not too late, Taz. You had another example actually from the book, and let me just put this so we have it on screen. What was the example from this one, this picture?
Well, if you notice, for those who have the book, for every chapter, first of all, every chapter is a collection of sayings that are in one category. So chapter 1 is about 5 sayings about patience. Discipline is chapter 2, responsibility. So the first drawing on the first page really describes what is going on in the whole chapter.
So this is chapter 4?
Yes, that's for chapter 4. And okay. So chapter 4 is about love and good health. Okay. So that chapter is talking about really those 2 parents. If you see them, they are in a fight. If there is domestic violence in a family, you can see one child they're neglected completely. The damage that will occur on the children is way more than you can even imagine, because they see parents fighting every day. It impacts their social life, it impacts their development, they are neglected. So that picture is an introduction to that chapter. And that is again the chapter which has when 2 elephants fight, is the grass that suffers. So it really, really is bringing to the forefront the fact that your actions don't impact only you. You have to think of everyone else around you, and then adjust your actions so that you are not hurting people without knowing.
Oh, wow. That's very powerful. So we've actually got a question here that I wanted to ask before we get into it. So this is from David, who's also here in Singapore, and he asked a question about cultural appropriation. And it's a good question to have. We recently had a conversation about this when Disney decided to patent Hakuna Matata, and Kenyans were up in arms that there's no way you can actually patent Swahili language. So I don't know what your thoughts are on any instances you've seen of this. And David, if that's not the context that you're asking, please clarify and I'll flash your clarification.
Yes, so if I understand what David is asking, I mean, culture is something that is, it's diverse, but it's also shared. I realized in writing this book and from the reviews that I begin to get to people who are reading the book is that actually we're much more similar than we are different. So I was talking with a Russian friend who also bought the book, and just reading through, she's like, we have this saying in Russia, we have this saying and then I'm thinking, we are actually just the same. So the asking of, this is my culture and this is my way of doing things. When you look closer, we are not so different. But we do want to put ourselves in little circles, little pockets, so that we can get that sense of belonging. And so in the end, I mean, when people talk about Ubuntu in South Africa, it is a concept. And I'm sure that concept could be found in almost every culture, just basic humanity. And what Disney does, or what anybody who wants to commercialize that, is to put it in a context and then package it nicely and sell it out to the world. But it's not something you can sell. It is really something that is part of how people live, how people do things. Basic consideration for someone else is a basic human characteristic. You could find it in Sweden, you could find it in China, you could find it anywhere. So I'm one person who is very diverse, and I think I'm more curious to find what makes us similar, what do we have the same, than what makes us different, because very little makes us different besides the way people dress. It's like the question of the jollof rice of Ghana versus jollof rice of Nigeria. They are really, and they will really stand by it and say, this is better because this is ABC, but it's really much the same. Or if it's different, you enjoy one when you're in Ghana, you enjoy the other one when you're in Nigeria. And then you have both, you don't have to choose.
That's true. And actually, there's an instance of potentially cultural appropriation that I thought was fascinating. In 2013, I think David Beckham described himself as Black. And if you talk about the US, people call Bill Clinton the first Black president because he was very pro-Black and loved by Blacks in America. So what's your view on that when people are blatantly calling themselves a different race, but it's more they identify with some of the cultural aspects of that race as opposed to people said, oh, how dare he call himself Black?
And then what is wrong with being Black? So it's all, again, it's commercialization, because maybe, I mean, there are so many things where I think I'm Dutch. So many things. The fact that I like to keep time, though I'm not good at it. The fact that I like to be, some of the things that I do, I could say I'm purely Dutch in that aspect. And when I go back to Uganda, people think I'm strange, because I'm saying, let's meet at 2 and let it please be 2. And I will be probably there at 2. And I'll be upset when you're not there at 2. But then does that make me Dutch? And what does it mean to be Dutch, despite that I am Black? So with Beckham saying he's Black, it's just commercialization. It's nothing to do, because if a certain aspect of being Black makes you at an advantage, then do it. But then you find that people, you find this, for example, we call them our white brothers. When somebody marries a Ugandan, they become part of our Ugandan community. When we have a Ugandan party, we will call them because they are Ugandan, but they are also Dutch. And if you look at it in trying to put it in a box, because the reason one of my friends says, I am Ugandan at heart, because he loves Ugandan food. He says, I love the Ugandan cuisine. I'm Ugandan. So, yeah, well, take that part and enjoy it. You are partly Ugandan, you're partly everything. These cultural appropriations are really more showing how we are different, but we're very much the same.
I agree with you. But you did have a story that you shared with me of someone a kid who was on a tram saying that they're Dutch, and it triggered a debate. So do you want to just share that? Because that was an interesting point.
Oh yeah, this is a scenario that you hear a lot because, like I said, my kids have lived here all their life. They speak Dutch. If my son speaks Dutch, you would think he's Dutch. Like he speaks. If you don't see him, you think, oh, that's really very indigenous Dutch. And if he speaks English, so he has a Dutch passport, and the Ugandan law doesn't allow him to get a Ugandan passport. So he is Dutch in every way. He couldn't go anywhere else and claim to be something different. But there was this scenario with a boy who must be in that situation, a similar boy who was around 13 or something. And they were on a tram and they must have been going to school. And it was a group of boys, and a few were black and some were Dutch, indigenous Dutch, white, if I may use black and white. I really don't have any much political appropriation because black, white, brown, it really doesn't matter. But he was African descent for sure. And he said, in his statement, when he said he's Dutch, as he was talking, and say, with the Dutch, we do it like this. And then another boy looked at him and said, oh, you're not Dutch. And he said, of course I'm Dutch. I have a Dutch passport. He's like, what do you think I am? He's like, yeah, but you come from Africa. And so they got into that kind of argument. So he saw himself as Dutch, but this Dutch boy saw him as not Dutch because he's from Africa. And I can imagine how his day ended. When he goes home, he's going to have very many questions for his parents. Who am I? Am I Dutch? Am I not? And that's what happens. I'm sure if my son was in a similar situation, he would have explained to him exactly who he is. I am Dutch. I've lived here all my life. I have a Dutch passport. Yeah, and my parents are from Africa. So I'm also African. And he wouldn't, but this boy was really embarrassed, but he was also disappointed that he's not accepted by the people he thinks he's a part of. So it's an identity crisis for these children if they really don't understand who they are. They are not only Dutch, they are not only African, they are a blend of all the above.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good one. So actually, I've skipped one question that we discussed before, and this is about African parenting style. So when we had talked previously, we talked about some of the pros and the cons, and I think you cover a lot of that in your book, where you talk about, African parents impart on you, a way to be a good good citizen of the world, to be a good person. So we talked about the pros and the cons, and do you want to just elaborate for the people that are watching? Because this is a topic that I'm hugely fascinated by, especially when you hear about tiger moms in Asia, or Indian parenting style, where parents say you will do engineering, medicine, or accounting, and then you can do whatever you want. So there's sort of different standards and ways in which different parents raise their kids. So do you want to just elaborate on this?
Yeah, so being African and raising a child like in Europe or America can really bring that challenge of the way you see success. What would you see your son to be? Because every parent wants their child to be more successful than they were and take advantage of all the challenges. But when I was growing up in Africa, you could be a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, and if everything failed, you can also be a nurse, and if it still fails, you can be a teacher. So there's that kind of pyramid of what can you be that defines success, because it then gives you the status. And so when we are raising our children here, and with that limited knowledge of what they can be, we forget the fact that they are, first of all, in a completely different age where you can be so many things. You can also be successful as those many things. So if you were growing up in Africa and you want to do music, they're like, what are you going to do with music? Or you want to do arts and drama, or because they don't see that as success. And yet there's so many people who are happy and successful doing those kinds of things. So if I look at the Netherlands, for example, the status that you have is not really much dependent on what kind of job you are doing, because every job is equally respected. You can be equally successful and happy, but we do have our parents who will want you to be in a certain to take a certain profession because that's what they want you to be. So it kind of limits you, and you have always this tag, and they don't expose them to all other possibilities. You have children doing piano lessons, dancing lessons, sport. There's almost everything they can do. So it can be quite a challenge for the parents who also don't have an understanding of the education system. And I tell some of my kids, some of the jobs you'll do are not even made yet. So just develop your best potential, and you don't know what will come. So you can be anything you want. You can really be anything you want. But then there is also the feeling of, or because there's some jobs for Black people and there's some jobs for the lower socioeconomic. So most people think, okay, in the care industry, it's full of the foreigners. So, sometimes also the institutional educational system guide your child towards that way. It's a very big discussion in the Netherlands because the Netherlands is kind of like socialist. So the teacher will already advise you that your child is very good in this, maybe they can do care. And there's a lot of the vocational studies, and it's all good, it's equally successful. But as an African parent, you always hear that I want my child to do this, but I'm being told my child can't go to the university because they need to go to the vocational school. And because they come to it so late, because it's already set up by the time the child is a teenager, that system is already set up. You really can't fight it. So it calls for an understanding of the local educational system. It calls for an understanding of what is there to do. There is a lot to do. Open your mind. If you're raising kids abroad, there can be lots of things. And there is nothing that this is for these people and this is for that people. They can be whatever they want. And once you have that feeling they can be whatever they want, no one is going to stop you and no one is going to stop them. So go for it. We can really stimulate our children to do almost anything.
What about African parents in Africa? Because we're still we have a very tunnel and narrow view of what success is. And like you say, 20 years ago, if you told me that you could make a living out of being a basketball player, a football player, an actor, or what, I'd have laughed at you. Because when you look in Africa, people don't really make money from sports, and yet in the US, are the highest paid professionals in the world. So there's like a different concept as to what you can do in your day-to-day career. So what advice do you have for African parents in Africa?
I think most of the educational system is equally narrowed down. And the one thing that I would like African parents to know is that, yes, follow the education system, but expose your child to a lot else outside the educational system. Because in Africa, you have to make the grades, otherwise all is doomed. So the focus on the grade is so much that, the child can almost not function somewhere outside the society or the academic society. So follow the structure, but expose your child so much, and understand that the first degree is only a start. Because if you do the first degree, it gets you to a certain level, because in Africa, you have to go to university more or less, but it's only a start. Because after the first degree, you could decide to do something else. If I studied accounting, I don't have to look for jobs only in accounting. So that's why you find people think, oh, you did a university degree and now you're going to do farming? What's wrong with you? As if farming does not need an education. So the first degree is only a start, and most people had a big challenge with me after doing 5 years in medical school, practicing medicine, and now I'm teaching kids. What's wrong with you? But that's what I want to do. And the first degree was not a waste of time. It set me up for the next level. So really to open the mind and let the child follow several options. They still have to finish school, because in Africa, if you don't finish school, you don't have a lot of possibilities. But they still can also look around and see what else interests them, and they can do it. Just they need the parental support.
But do you think we're pushy enough? Like we really push our kids to be the best, to be at the top of their game, or do we settle for average?
I think we are pushy at home, but when we come abroad, we're not pushy enough, in the sense that education abroad is very much more relaxed, but also we think there isn't much that you can do to influence what your child becomes. So we do need to push our kids. If you sign up your child to a football club, push them to be the best there. If you sign them up to a dancing class, push them to be the best there. And in Holland, it's okay to get the average grades. And my son tells me, he's like, yeah, but that's enough. I'm like, okay, average. But do a little bit more, because that applies in life. If in grades you push a bit more, you find that in life you'll push a bit more. But if you're just so chill, then it's not enough. And we don't focus enough on raising our kids, because in Africa, school kind of raises your child. But here, you have to do it all. You have to make sure they do their homework. You have to help them with the homework, and you have to make sure they get to where they need to be. So we in that case, I don't think we do enough as Africans in the diaspora. We can do more to open up channels for our children.
Wow, that's amazing. So you've written this book. Do you have any advice for anyone else who wants to publish a book? Because I think what you said, one of the inspirations for you was to make sure that we have a lot of African content out there. And actually, viewers, you might not see this, but like the whole of my shelf above, all of those books on the top shelf are actually African books written by African authors. So I'm really big on promoting and supporting African writers. So do you have any advice for anyone who wants to publish a book?
Well, if you want to publish a book, first of all, it's I realize it's easier than I thought, but you do need a little budget to get a good publisher. And for most of us who are not known authors, traditional publishing might not be easy, because somebody has to pick you up, a publishing company has to pick you up. But self-publishing is a very good option. You can look for any a number of self-publishing companies there, because they will just publish your book. They won't, you just pay them and they will publish your book. They'll do all the work that you have no expertise to do. And even if you want, you pay for them to market it. So getting it on Amazon, getting it out there. When I wanted to publish my books, I wanted African illustrations. I wanted them really to portray African life. And the publisher knows that. So they will get an illustrator who can actually fulfill that. So have a small budget. I mean, it can range depending on the book, and if it's colors, anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 euros, depending on what you want. Have a small budget, and then find a good publisher, and then do the writing, and they'll do the rest. So that is an easy way. I noticed when you write more and more, then traditional publishing companies start to look for you, and then your future manuscripts can be accepted. So it's really about finding a publisher. Most of them are self-publishing companies. There's so many out there. I had no idea until I started looking.
Yeah, so I use Amazon self-publishing for my first book, but like we discussed before, I want to redo it and get a company that can help me with the marketing. So again, it depends on whether you have the capacity to do certain things, or do you want a company to support you a bit more. So our conversation is very helpful, and maybe I'll try and document some of that on the blog as to how people can go about writing books.
Yeah, what I found is that anything you can't do yourself, there's a company there that you can pay to do it.
Just like there's an app for everything.
Yes, exactly.
So what future projects do you have?
So I want to write more books. I want to write, so my books, on all of them have mother tongue series. So I want to write more books in the series about everything African, clothing, dressing. So my next book is going to be about, it's a kids book. They're all kids books. So my next book is going to be about how does one go through the process. For example, it's a boy meets girl. So it's supposed to be along the Cinderella kind of books. This princess meets this prince, and they get married and live happily ever after. I put some drama for dramatic effect, but it details that marriage traditional customs, like the dances they dance and the clothing they dress at weddings, and the different ceremonies that have to be done. So something like that for a child to understand, but also very well illustrated, that they can really, after reading it, it looks like you've been to an African wedding. A Ugandan wedding, because it will be largely Ugandan. And I'm hoping that some of my books eventually will become maybe a series or movies or something that kids can watch.
Oh, that's great. I really want to get into African movies and content. So we should probably talk some more after this.
Yes.
Actually, just remind the people, where can they buy your books?
My book is available on Amazon, at all online bookstores globally. So Amazon, and I've come across so many others. If you just go online and in your local area, you will find it online, and some you get the Kindle or the paperback version. And then I'm working on looking at how to make it available in Africa. So if anybody knows any bookstores that are interested in, for example, stocking the physical copies, because it's a print on demand. So you order the book and they print it when you order. So I don't print so many books. So most of the online bookstores will have it.
Okay, that's great. And we've got some feedback from people watching. So Kenneth says, great interview. Thank you for making it possible. Thank you, Kenneth, for tuning in. My big fans, my mom is on. So hi, Mom. I always have to say hello to my parents. And Selma has feedback here after this conversation. So she says, we need to teach our kids to dream big and to take risks. And I agree with that. We need to take an active role and be present at school, be part of the parent group, volunteer and show up at school. Your kids will see you taking an active part in their education, and hopefully push them. This says hopefully push them to do their best is the
Absolutely.
end of that. Yeah, I agree with you, Taz. I mean, there's more that we can do. I'm not a parent, so I'm like super aunt. I try to do my bit when it comes to education. I'm super big on education, so I always try to push my nephew and niece to make sure they take it seriously, but also to buy them books. So as you can see, I'm a book lover. Get them to read and open their mind. So if they can't travel, then let them travel through words, is what I've always believed in.
Yes.
So
yeah, really, I think that's a very important. Buy your kids so many books.
Yeah, I agree. And get them reading very early. So I always worry when kids are not reading. And there was a show I watched, which actually was an American show, not an African one. Oh no, it was a British show or British TV. And they asked children, what was the last book you read? And this kid said, IKEA catalog. And it just really broke my heart. I think it was in the UK on the news, because the concern was children are not reading. So please make sure your children are actually reading books and not catalogs and thinking that is a book. Otherwise, we'll be raising children whose minds are not open, but they're also not able to grasp basic things about life that you learn through reading. So we're coming up to the hour. Do you have any final words before we close the show?
Well, really to thank people who have shared their views in this interview, but also to encourage people to really take an active role in their children, but also to take an active role in promoting the African culture wherever they are. And we don't have to go in the defense for African culture whenever somebody has a negative view of Africa, because that's very common. But we do have to do a lot of good, put it out there, so that when people hear Africa, it's not just death and starving kids and hunger. We want to show Africa that is happy, a place where people want to go and where people are able to see that there is more to life in Africa, not just the negative. So keep promoting the positive about Africa.
No, definitely. It's from having conversations with people like you and from the comments from people that we learn a lot about each other. I think one of the things that motivated me to start the blog was that we don't know enough about our own neighbors. I know more about the US, about the UK than I do. I've been to Uganda, so I know a little bit about Uganda, but say Sudan, Ethiopia, West Africa is really, I don't know enough about that. So the more we talk and the more we share amongst ourselves, I think the more we bridge that gap that we have and start to appreciate, as you say, our similarities, because there are more similarities than not.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And I hope to see you next time I'm in Netherlands. So I know Molly's husband really well. We're at school together, but we haven't seen each other in more than 10 years. So hopefully I'll get to see you soon.
Yes, please. Come by when you're in Amsterdam.
I will do. And thank you so much for making the time tonight. And thank you so much for everybody who has tuned in today. Always appreciate the support and hope you find it useful. I do need to apologize for the tech because we did have some challenges and the Wi-Fi was patchy, but I will upload the video onto YouTube and post the link. So please tune in. But thank you so much and see you next time. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.